We are now back in session. There are still individuals that waited to speak this evening under general public comment. Next speaker is Don Schrader, followed by Ellen Wagman, followed by Mike Gomez, followed by Tad Naminsky. And again, once your name has been called, if you're here, would you please come to the front and be prepared to speak. Don Schrader, Ellen Wagman, Mike Gomez, and Tad Naminsky. I see Tad here. After Tad, we've got Silvio Delangelo, Dr. Bill Cass. Mr. Naminsky, you're up. Tad, you're next. Go and proceed.
You're up.
Oh,
You're up.
I'm sorry. Just a second. I wasn't ready for it. Well, let me start here from, I am really fed up with mayoral recommendation. Finally, it's time to speak up. Mayoral recommendation, architects, 3 of them. That's right, 3 architects. Yes, mayor is very active in construction right here, downtown area, including streets. I'm also fed up. All this Broadway, Lomas, Central, and Central, downtown, right here, destroyed completely streets. Last week, and even this week, Lomas, that's only 2 lane, 1 lane open, each direction. Broadway, yeah, for 2 weeks, and so on. What about these architects appointing? Then bookkeeper, CPA, Moss, firm. Well, my point is, why don't you, that is supposed to be some process, bidding for job, including lawyers, not appointing, bidding for jobs. That's simple as that. So that's the process should be. Appropriate way to handle. Well, then goes right here. City Council, probably 90% approved every mayoral recommendation, or maybe 99%. That's all I got to say on this subject. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Silvio Delangelo, followed by Bill Cass, followed by Scott Hickerson.
Mr. President, councilors, I sent you enough of an email. You know what issues that I want to talk about. You know, as this overhead shows, you know, the mayor in 2009 and I supported and promised a new era of transparency and accountability and procurement reform. But you know, he's lied to us since then, and the minions have as well. You know, we have the most corrupt city government and dangerous police force in the city history, and that's a fact. And that's a fact. I'd expected you folks to ask Chief Eden some of the hard questions you did, and you backed off again. You know, and I don't even think John Zeman could have spoken with a straight face when he pretended that this wall wasn't put up as a protection device and it was planned all along. Nobody believed him. Nobody believed him. And as I said at the last meeting, maybe the next thing we expect is bulletproof glass put up. You know, Councilor Benton, you made a point that you were tired, and maybe you spoke on behalf of everyone for the long and lengthy meetings, but we sat there listening to your unique downtown problem that could have been discussed offline. You know, you took up so much time that could have been done offline with the staff, and we were tired. We were tired of listening to you, and it's not to say it wasn't important, but this could have been, could have shown a little respect for us. You know, I'm not going to stay for the other two talks I planned to do. I mean, you consume so much money, so much of our time, and disrespected this last meeting, and with this delaying and laborious talking, did it again. I don't know whether you get it or not. Obviously, the mayor doesn't get it, nor does his minions. Maybe you'll get it in some time in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Bill Cass? Scott Hickerson? Welcome.
Welcome. I'd like to comment on the current POC system. POC, IRO, IADA is all nothing but one big mock trial. It's one big mock trial, and I'm concerned that the new bill that y'all are fixing to pass is going to trade one mock trial for another mock trial. And the reason I use the word mock trial is because our founding fathers used it in the Declaration of Independence. And I'll quote it. It's kind of hard to see, it's small, but he accused King George of quartering large numbers of armed troops amongst the people and for protecting them by mock trial from punishment for the murders that they would commit amongst the people of the states, for protecting them by mock trial from punishment. And that's what we have, is just one system that's all set up to protect anybody from getting into trouble and shuffling things around. Now, I don't know what the DOJ is going to say when they come out with their recommendations. Y'all have already rushed and have a bill together. I hope that you will, your recommendation and letting people see what's in it and debate it and comment is important, because if there's no teeth in it, if there's no real civilian oversight where people can make, where officers actually get punished. I mean, we've had how many years and not one single officer has ever been indicted or convicted for anything? People saw through it. Our founding fathers saw through the mock trial. We see through it, and we're getting tired of it. Thank you.
Thank you. The last speaker under general public comment will be Barbara Grothus. Welcome.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here with all the new decor and decorum for democracy. I have listened to the proclamations earlier, and I thought I would read a People's Proclamation. Whereas the militarization of the police was first so prominently displayed in Albuquerque on March 30th and now is receiving national attention as a result of the display in Ferguson. Whereas the council authorized APD in 2012 to write grants under the U.S. government program 1033 without oversight or approval, and whereas no place except maybe North Dakota and South Dakota have been more successful than New Mexico in gaining access to all manner of weapons and military hardware as a result of these grants, and whereas APD is sporting 350 new AR-15s, and whereas we have no idea what we have due to a lack of oversight, approval, or public inventory, and whereas APD, Ferguson, and many other police departments have been trained by the Israeli Defense Force in the use of these weapons against civilians, as we've seen in Palestine, be it resolved that the citizens oppose warfare against us and we will resist. Be it further resolved that we expect the council to withdraw their authority of APD to access any further weapons and technology until we see a de-escalation of the materials of war to be deployed against the citizens in our waning democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes general public comments. We are now under announcements. Councilor Pena.
There will be an Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Water Authority Utility meeting on Wednesday, August 20th at 5 p.m. in the Vincent E. Griego Chambers. There will also be an Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Government Commission meeting on Thursday, August 28th at 5 p.m. in the Vincent E. Griego Chambers.
Councilor Winter.
Thank you, Mr. President. There will be a Behavior Health Task Force meeting on Thursday, August 21st at 5:30 PM in the Council Committee Room.
Thank you, Councilor Peña-Winter. We are now under the consent agenda. Councilors, are there any changes to the consent agenda? And I move the approval of the consent agenda. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying yes. Yes, opposed? That carries unanimously. There are no public hearings this evening. The one item under approvals has been deferred. We are now under final action, and I am going to move item H, Committee Substitute R-92, to the front of the agenda, and that is changing the name of Ouray Road between Unser Boulevard and Ladera Drive to Bob McCannon Road. I move a do pass. We have a motion and a second, and I believe that we have Ms. McCannon here and also Dr. Valles to speak on this issue. Welcome, Sharice.
Thank you very much.
Welcome, Dr. Valles.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
President Sanchez and councilors, thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. It's quite an honor to be before you all today, asking for your consideration to change the road for the portion where my husband and I lived for 30 years. My husband worked very hard with the mayors and President Sanchez for this 30 years. I just spread my husband's ashes this Friday, and it comes to be quite an honor to be here representing him today. Thank you for your consideration. Thank you to Elaine and Ken and all of you for hard work on this bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharice. Dr. Valles?
I think we'll share these 2 minutes. I don't think it's going to be too long. First of all, thank you, Counselor, for bringing this up to the forefront. The one thing about Bob McCannon, I think it's already been said. There's just so many ways to say it. It's been said in letters, emails, in the prior committee. It's been said by numerous people at his memorial service. And I think, bottom line, straight shooting guy. He was important to the West Side, and he and the West Side community, I think, deserve this honor. Respectfully, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I'd like to make a couple of closing statements. I had a chance and opportunity to work with Mr. McCannon before I even got involved in politics, and he was in the forefront of trying to avoid putting an amphitheater on Albuquerque's west side and played a major role on that, where it was going to be a major disturbance for the community. Also, when it came to the road now named Ouray, which will be changed to the Bob McCannon Boulevard, Bob was extremely instrumental, but so was Sharice. I mean, we sat there in the hot sun for about 2.5 hours with Senator Sanchez and myself and Sharice and Bob talking about what needed to be done on that road. Because of Bob's hard work going to Santa Fe and working with me and working with the community, we were able to make that road a much safer road than what it is today. Also, when it came to the golf course, Bob wanted to make sure, and so did Sharice, that golf course was always up to par. No pun intended. And the golf course, I think, looks like it does today because of Bob's involvement and Sharice, also your involvement. But Bob played a major role in so many things in Albuquerque's west side, the parks, the roads. I know with West Bluff, he was in opposition to West Bluff. You know, some people were for it. That eventually got done. But I think his heart always was in the right place. And he was a straight shooter. If he didn't like something, he told you how he felt. But Bob, and working with mayors and working with council members in this community, truly got things done. So at this time, I'm going to ask this council to rename Ouray Boulevard, Ouray Road, after Bob McCannon Road. I think it's a real tribute for his work and also for your work, Sharice, and what the two of you have done over the last 30 years in this community.
Thank you.
And thank you for being a friend.
Thank you.
And urge your support. We have a motion and a second to adopt committee substitute R-92. All those in favor signify by saying yes. Yes. Opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you. We are now under item J. Under final action, under B, Counselor Peña, O-14.
I'm sorry, where are we?
O-14 is imposing an excise tax equal to 1/8 of 1% of gross receipts to be used for the purpose
Purpose
of funding essential services.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move it do pass, but I have a floor substitute that's going to be passed out.
We have a motion and a second.
So I have a copy. I can just start reading it. Should I read the entire ordinance, or can I just brief you on it?
I would just give us the highlights.
Okay. So this is imposing an excise tax equal to 1/8 of a percent. So what we're doing here is we're passing an ordinance, and once the ordinance will be established, once it goes to the voters. So then I have another bill after this that will send it to the voters in November. So it would have the effective date of municipal gross receipts tax imposed by the ordinance shall be July 1, 2015, only after the results of the election are certified in favor of the ordinance adoption, and adopted ordinance is delivered or mailed to the Taxation Revenue Department. So, the issue with the APD, one of the things that I talked about initially is that, the DOJ is gonna send down the report, and we're gonna have to adhere to a bunch of different trainings and such for APD. But one of the highlights in the DOJ report was about the mental health services needing to be addressed in our community. Some of the work I do professionally has been in line with this for many years. I think that we, as a community, if we don't address the underlying issues that we have, this is just, no matter what we do with APD, the problem's just going to be perpetuated year after year. So I would urge your support. I can talk a little more, but maybe if I can get some questions from the council.
Do you want to go and move the substitute, floor substitute? You gotta move it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll move floor substitute 014-14.
We have a motion and a second to move floor substitute O-14. All those in favor signify by saying yes. Yes. Opposed? We're back on the bill. We have one individual signed up to speak. Councilor Peña, let's go and allow that individual to speak. That would be Tad Naminsky.
So we are on 1413, right?
That is O-14,
I'm sorry?
O-14.
Oh, okay. Amending chapter 9, right?
Go and proceed.
I'm sorry?
Go and proceed.
Yeah, okay. Speaking about TOC, well, I'm asking for the big trouble. Yes, I got, believe it, 5 cases, 5 complaints I did file. But anyway, I'm not gonna back it out. I'm gonna say it that's the way is it. Last week, I was at the POC meeting.
Mr. Naminsky, this has to be germane to this agenda item that you've
I'm
signed up
sorry.
for, and that is imposing an excise tax equal to 1/8 of 1% of the gross receipts.
That's what we're at?
You're
I'm
talking about a different issue. It has to be germane to the subject matter at hand.
Are we on the 1/8 of a percent?
This is in regards to a increase in the sales tax of 1/8 of 1% that would go to the voters. So you're in a different subject matter.
I'm sorry, I don't know where we at.
Okay, then it-
That's my problem.
Okay, that's fine. Let's go and call up the next speaker. And and that's going to be Art Tannenbaum.
Because seems like President
I'm sorry, sir,
Sanchez
it's got
is
to be
going up.
related to the issue at hand. You're talking about a totally different issue.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, not a problem.
Okay. 1/8 of the percent, that is, 1/8 of the percent, that is, as I understand it, equal 16 million, right? Okay, where this money is gonna go? As I understand, 50% goes to mental health services, which is inpatient, right? And another 50% to construction, design, all different. I have outlined that over there. Are those monies go to where is the intent? No, it is to go to special interest groups, all the stakeholders, which is big list stakeholders, including Heading Homes, St. Martin, and I could, YDI, I can go on and on, all those stakeholders right here, $60 million.
Thank you, sir. Your time is expired.
This system is very corrupted.
Okay, we also have Art Tannenbaum.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Go and proceed.
Thank you, Council President Sanchez, and no disrespect intended. I agree with Councilor Pena that we need to address the underlying issues in our society. A lot of things have been neglected. I'm not sure about the floor substitute, but as a concerned citizen, a member of the community who, believe it or not, loves everybody, I think we need to take care of people. The only concern I have is that, as usual, the funding appropriated by the legislative branch of government is used in an appropriate manner by the executive branch. So I know it's not a perfect world. I agree that we do need to address some of these underlying issues. I support this measure, and I hope that the funding will be used in a proper fashion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tannenbaum. Councilor Gordon.
Thank you. Mr. Tannenbaum?
Yes, sir.
This is, Ray Garduño. Be glad to share the floor substitute with you so you can see specifically what's changed. But
Council
also,
President Sanchez, Councilor Garduño, I really appreciate that.
okay, and I'll get that to you. The other thing is that Councilor Pena, I'm sure, would be happy to just talk about a few of the changes, just so that both yourself and the audience will be apprised of what you're trying to accomplish with this.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
Thank you. Councilor Lewis, then we'll go back to Councilor Pena.
Thank you, Mr. President. A question for our staff, just on some clarification on this bill. What is, I guess I'm kind of wondering, what was the purpose of this bill in relation to the following bill that sends it to the voters, and why? It just seems a little like we're preempting that bill, like we're making a decision here. Is this technicality, or is there something we have to do according to our ordinance?
Mr. President, Councilor Lewis, you're right. It is a little counterintuitive, but what we're doing is we're following the guidelines that the Tax and Rev Department has put together that inform municipalities how they go about a voter-approved GRT increment. And what that guideline says, and it is counterintuitive, is that the first step in the process is that the council passes the ordinance to enact the increment, and then passes an election resolution that puts the question on the ballot. And the reason there's a floor sub in front of you this evening is because we wanted to make clear in this floor sub that the floor sub is only approved and only goes into effect after the voters have approved it. And so if you look on page 3, section 6, one of the changes that this floor sub makes is it says that the effective date of the tax is July 1st, 2015, and only after the results of the election are certified to be in favor of the ordinance's adoption.
This bill sets it in motion. I mean, it's if you were in favor of sending this issue to the voters. I mean, I'm sure you'd want to set this bill sets it in motion, so you'd be in favor of, getting it started in this way, and I guess this is just how it gets started. So it's I guess a couple phases to how we put a question like this on the
Mr. President,
ballot.
Councilor Lewis, fortunately or unfortunately, it's a necessary first step in the process.
And Mr. President, Mr. Zaman, we worked through this budget this past year, and we put a pretty significant amount of dollars that went toward health services, homelessness, developmentally disabled. We put $1 million that the mayor recommended specifically for DOJ recommendations and having to do substance abuse, the at-risk population. I mean, that whole thing I think that we're addressing here, I think that Councilor Pena's wanting to address. We added another $1 million to that. We increased, I think, our entire budget in all these areas. We increased that. And it was a result of many, many hearings that happened this spring, a result of but do you know that dollar amount? I think it was something.
Mr. President, Councilor Lewis, I believe it's in the $17.5 million range total.
And that's $17.5 million specifically in our budget in 2015 that addressed the issues that we're talking about here, the health services and essential health services. And then an additional, what I've heard, an additional about $47,000 in federal funding and state funding that comes, that is in some way use, again, social service contracts that we participate in that come from federal and state government contracts.
Mr. President, Councilor Lewis, an additional 20 to 40 million in federal dollars, state and federal dollars.
So 20 to 40, then you add our 17 million or so, and so we could be up in 50 million plus that we spend, the city of Albuquerque spends addressing these issues. And again, we increased it this year pretty insignificantly. So out of all those dollars, in this next budget year, is there a prediction on how much of that funding that's in place right now that we're going to use?
Mr. President, Councilor Lewis, I can't speak to how the state and federal dollars are going to be spent, but my understanding is approximately 90% of the city's funding will be spent.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. President.
Councilor Pena?
Well, I think Mr. Zaman answered some of the questions that Mr. Garduño was talking about. Is there anything additional that you wanted me to?
No.
Okay.
Council Vice President Jones?
Thank you, Mr. President. I think my concern about this, it's essential that we help the needy people in our city, and we do all, I believe, recognize that there's a huge mental health issue. I think we're discounting the amount of money that the taxpayers are providing to UNM Hospital in the range, the last I heard, of about $90 million a year. And their task, they are charged with handling the majority of these issues that we're talking about here, to include facilities. So I guess I have to ask how we can ask the taxpayers to pay more money when we are rather ambiguous in what we're going to use it for. We're not specific on any item here. When we have other uses that are funded by the taxpayers that are very specific that we are working on right now. So the ambiguity of this is concerning to me, and it's not possible for me to support an issue that is so broad when we're asking the taxpayers to come up with more money.
Any other comments, questions? I have concerns about this. I mean, I support this committee substitute. I think it's vitally important, or this floor substitute, to this community, more now than ever before. We talk about these different agencies that have this money, but have they used that money appropriately? Apparently that's not been the case. But we are asking the taxpayers of this community to make that decision, to make that investment on their own by saying yes to this 1/8 cent gross receipts tax. I mean, we can provide a treatment facility with 24/7 supervision and services for the mentally ill individuals who are unable to live independently because of their high levels of need. We've seen just recently the 2 homeless Native Americans who were brutally murdered on Albuquerque's west side. The James Boyd case, I mean, he was in and out of the prison system for many years. He was in Las Vegas and he was released. But I mean, we've got a major and a serious problem. I think right now, today, that this problem is in the forefront of our community. And I think we're all very concerned about the homeless. We're all extremely concerned about mental illness. And I think the most critical issue and the underlying issue is substance abuse. And those will also be issued, be dealt with in this legislation. And it will be not up to this council, but to the voters of the city of Albuquerque to make that investment into these very critical and serious issues. We know they're serious. We know it's impacted this community in many, many ways. And I think now is the ideal time to let the voters make this decision. I mean, we can just send this to the voters, and they will have the final decision if they want to impose a 1/8% gross receipts tax, you know, for this budget. We had the support of Councilor O'Malley, or Commissioner O'Malley, and basically we were looking at doing this countywide, but because of the time restraints, that did not happen. They had 30 days to get this on the agenda, and time was going to be of the essence. But I just would hope that this council would allow the voters of Albuquerque to make such a critical decision when we are dealing with such serious, serious problems with the mentally ill and the homeless problems in our community. Council Vice President Jones, and then Councilor Pena.
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree. This is something that absolutely has to go before the voters if it's going to be done. But we are still not telling them what are we going to do with it. Your interpretation of essential services and my interpretation of essential services could be totally different. Do the voters actually know, when we get to the next item, what it is? What can we do with it? What are we going to do with it? And what is there about this that is different from the monies, the 100 million so that that's already out there for them? So I agree, we must do something. We must do something for the people who are in need. But I would like to know what it is we're going to do for them before we vote to do something, because we need to do something, but not necessarily talk about what it is we're going to do.
Councilor Benton?
I think by the time that this would come before the voters, we're going to have some pretty good direction from the Behavioral Health Task Force that's planning to release their findings in September. I think it'll be made very clear that we can spend this money effectively and with accountability. I understand your argument, Councilor Jones, and I'm sympathetic to it, but I'm also very clear, having worked with that task force to date, as to the need. And I think the community understands the need. I think our police department understands the need for these kind of services. They've been placed in a difficult situation very often because of our lack of these services. And to me, we're kind of at a critical turning point for the city. I mean, if the evidence is there, it's there in the news every day. It's there right before your eyes if you walk around on the streets and see some of the individuals that are suffering out there. We pretty much are faced with this kind of investment, or making a very difficult and odd decision to agree to put up tent camps for these people. I mean, they're already camping down on First Street in south of downtown. It's a big impact on our economic development in downtown, and the need is very clear to me. But I would say, in answer to your argument, Councilor Jones, I think we will have a very clear idea of where these funds will be spent come October, prior to the election.
Councilor Pena?
And just to add to what Councilor Benton is saying, is that he's exactly correct. You know, we established this task force, and through the task force, We actually supported an ordinance for an essential services study, and that study should be able to identify the gaps in our community. I know there's a lot of money put for social services, but not all of them are to really look at some of these intense services that we need. You know, police officers, I hear this all the time, are forced to deal with these issues out in the community, and they're not trained to be social service workers. And when we look at the prison population, most of the prisoners that we have, most of the people that are incarcerated suffer from some form of mental illness. And when they're released from the jails, they actually only receive 3 days worth of medication, and then they're kind of on their own, you know. So I don't know how much money it's going to take to address this issue, but I do know that I think it's important to ask the voters. We're asked to take real bold steps in order to make a difference in our community, and I think it's important that we ask voters to support something that would help to alleviate this problem that we have in our community. You know, and when we talk about some of the issues, I know it does seem vague, but we really can't put in here exactly what it would go to, because there's a process that has to be followed. Once we identify the gaps that we have in our community, then there will be people that'll come out and they'll be able to apply or be able to access those dollars. But some examples of some of the things that could be funded is to establish an evaluation center where persons with mental health illness could be evaluated, stabilized, and referred to long-term services. I know this is something that's really supported in the community. And then also, we could potentially provide a treatment center with 24/7 supervision and services for mentally ill individuals who are unable to live independently because of their high level of need. You know, earlier I heard someone, you know, talk about YDI, and I hate to bring this up in my role as City Council, but we had a person who was accessing our services, and they had a lot of mental health issues, and unfortunately the person turned 18 and we didn't have the resources to be able to provide any additional support, and unfortunately something very tragic happened to one of our clients. And with these dollars, not only organizations like YDI but others like Heading Home could really be able to help fill these voids in the community, because the tax isn't just for adding more dollars, it's for really looking at what the gaps are and being able to fill those voids.
Councilor Winter.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'm kind of involved in that mental health task force too, and I know that the city, the county, UNMH, and the state, and we've got a lot of elected officials on it, and I think the point is what we're trying to do is see the services out there, who's offering those services, where that money's coming from, what that money's being used for. And I think it ought to be a joint ask. I mean, we're talking about extra taxpayer money. First of all, what is the taxpayer money being used for? And if it's being used the way it should be used, and I think that's what this task force is trying to find out. And you know, we keep giving money, and this is a tax increase, and so I want to really find out first what that money's being used for, and who's putting that money in. How much is the state putting? How much is UNMH, which is also taxpayer money? How much is the county putting in? Where we work this together, and that's why I just think it's too premature to approve this now. I just think we need to wait. We need to all work together. And if it's going to be a tax increase, then all the agencies look at doing it.
Councilor Gibson, and then Councilor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think this is something that the people in Albuquerque want to see on the ballot. I think this is something that it covers a lot of different issues: addiction, mental illness, and those are certainly two issues that touch every family I know in one way or another. So once we add homelessness to that, it makes for a very hard life. Pardon me. I think this is something that, in short, that voters want to be able to vote on, and I predict that it will pass largely, by a large margin. Thank you.
Councilor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. President. For our staff or legal, if this bill and the next bill were to pass tonight, let's say majority votes for this, well, first of all, I've heard that there's a possibility that possibly this question and others that were from this point forward, if we choose, may not make it on the November ballot, and there's a reason for that, I guess. Did you address that, Mr. Zaman?
Mr. President, Councilor Lewis, that's right. Staff has been in discussions with the county clerk about the number of state and county issues that are going to be on the ballot in addition to federal issues. And so there's very little room on the ballot, and the county clerk has informed staff that there may be room for 1 or 2 city items on the ballot. But if this were to pass and the other 2 propositions were to pass, there would be 5 city questions potentially referred to the ballot.
And, Mr. President, we're gonna do an election resolution, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and so I'm assuming maybe the council president will sponsor that. There'll be an election resolution. And when will that come before the council?
Mr. President, it's on the agenda for this evening.
An election resolution that will include
Mr.
these
President,
questions?
Councilor Lewis, we've got amendments for any questions that pass this evening to incorporate them into the election resolution.
Okay, so this resolution, or this ordinance, and the change along with next resolution that I guess puts this question, it puts it onto the election resolution is what it does. The question is going to go into the election resolution, and that's going to be the bill that'll come out of this, I guess, the meeting tonight.
Correct.
Okay, so if this bill and the next bill were to pass, say, on majority, so the mayor would not have an opportunity to, let's say, make a decision on this or use the administration, I guess, powers of veto. On this specific bill and the next one, the mayor wouldn't have that opportunity to do that specifically on this, or would he?
Mr. President, it's our position that he would not.
Okay, so this bill could pass, and then it would go directly to the election resolution, but the mayor would have the ability to use those powers on the election resolution, correct?
Mr. President, Councilor Lewis.
Okay.
Councilor Harris.
And assuming that the election resolution was vetoed, then I guess then at that point in time there'd be no city questions on the ballot. Is that the position?
Mr. President, assuming that the city council didn't override it at September 3rd meeting, that's correct.
Okay. And I would just caution folks to just check out the votes of this, because I would hate to muddle this thing up so that we don't have any election on one of the other issues that we all agree on, because we want to make a point on something. I believe that one way we could, or 5 councilors could rather, put something on a ballot, even if the mayor didn't like it, would be at a general municipal election, because at that point in time, it's my belief that the mayor could not veto the general resolution, and the charter requires us to have a municipal election every 2 years. So if there's something that only 5 councilors agree with, then that might be the way to do it, is put it on the general election in 2015, I guess would be the next one. But I just ask the other councilors not to mess up our election of the proposals that we all agree on.
Well, I don't think that the council would mess up the election. It would be the mayor by vetoing the legislation and the resolution that would cause
Excuse me, Mr. President, if the council knows it's going to happen, it's the council that's participating.
But we're not messing anything up. It's the decision of the mayor. If he makes that decision to veto that resolution, it's not the council, it's the mayor.
If, Mr. President, if the council sends that, sends something up to the mayor's desk, knowing it's dead on arrival, then the council is participating in that bad decision.
Well, I would hope that you would not speak on behalf of the mayor. That would be a decision by the mayor, not by Councilor Harris. Councilor Garduno and then Councilor Winter.
Thank you, Mr. President. Those on the council that were elected as mayors, please raise your hand. What are we doing arguing about something that has nothing to do with anything? If the mayor wants to veto something, let him do it. You know, he has to answer to his constituents just like we do. And if we want to pass something and run the risk, if that's what you want to call it, that it'll be vetoed, that's on him. If we want to do legislation, I think we should not be encumbered by this idle threat of the fact that it may or may not pass the mayor's veto. That's his prerogative. If he wants to veto everything, and he's done a lot of them, wants to veto everything we put forward, That's his prerogative. But I don't think we should stop legislating just because we think he might do it.
Councilor Winter, then Councilor Lewis, and then Council Vice President Jones.
No, Mr. President, thank you, Councilor Winter, and we're just asking clarification questions, Councilor Garduno. I mean, we're clarifying it. I think that probably was, I don't know if the rest of the council even knew that, what we're doing here tonight is dealing with these issues, and it's going to build toward the election resolution, which will be one bill that'll come out of here tonight. I'm assuming the mayor can't line item veto that bill, could he?
Mr. President, no, there's no economic aspects.
Okay, so we're dealing with questions here tonight. We're dealing with this question. We're going to deal with other questions, and it's going to make a difference on how we vote on and deal with the election resolution, regardless of what the mayor does. Of course, he has the ability. But on this specific one, the mayor does not have the ability to be able to give to be able to give a legislative type opinion directly on this resolution, this ordinance change and the resolution that's going to follow.
Councilor Winter? Council Vice President Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Zaman. A point of clarification. Considering that we've already been made very clear to us that the county is not going to have room for very many items on the ballot. Is there a reason, since odds are really good, and again, I'm only speculating, but we seem to have a lot of issues here, and they're saying 2. Is there a reason why this particular piece has to be voted on now? If in fact it were to be, we could wait until after the commission, the Mental Health Commission comes back so they can say what they recommend we use this on. Is there a reason why is there a timing issue that says that we can't do this after we know what we're voting on, rather than the old, you have to vote for it before we get to know what it says?
Mr. President, Councilor Jones, I think the timing issue here is the desire to get this question on the November ballot. And with that in mind, the county clerk has the responsibility to get the final ballot to the Secretary of State by September 9th. So I think part of what's driving the timeline here is that September 9th deadline that the county clerk has to get the finalized ballot to the Secretary of State.
And Mr. Zaman, if I may, Mr. President.
Go proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Zaman. And that would be assuming that some of the other issues that are passed or could be passed aren't on it. I mean, how do we set which issues go on that ballot? Does the city council get to say that? Does the mayor get to say that? Does the county clerk get to say that? How is it voted on? Which issues, if we have to eliminate, say we have 5, and we can only put 2 on, how do we determine which 2 go on?
Mr. President, Councilor Jones, hypothetical, let's say, for example, the council chooses to put all 5 questions in the election resolution and refer those to the city clerk and ultimately the county clerk. Ultimately, the county commission would have the final say as to what goes on the ballot, in consultation with the county clerk about what will and what will not fit on the ballot. It's possible that when the county clerk and the county commission get the questions that the city has forwarded to them, that they look and say, we can fit this one, and this one, but not this one and that one. And so it would be at the discretion of the commission to choose which questions are on.
Go and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. So one more. So assuming that we can't get them all on, and we will have to have a special election for something that we're looking at here if the majority of these pass, what is the rush to put this one? Can we not simply pass something to put on our special mail-in election? The city would have to hold anyway if more than 2 of the issues pass.
Mr. President, Councilor Jones, the council could choose to prioritize the legislation somehow this evening, or the council could choose to refer some to the municipal election in October of 2015, or say these ones are going to go on the November ballot and we're going to delay the rest. It's entirely the council's prerogative.
or one more, and that is if this is a burning issue and we don't have the answers and we're not comfortable with voting on it yet, that we could wait and actually, there's a possibility that there will be a mail-in election for the issues that don't get on the next general election.
Mr. President, Councilor Jones, there is that possibility. There's also the possibility that the constitutional amendment that prohibits cities from putting municipal issues on the school board ballots passes, and then some of the city questions could be placed on the February ballot, the school board ballot.
Thank you, Mr. Zamani.
Councilor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe there's two other questions that we've already, that came through resolutions that we've already recommended to go on the ballot. And the police and fire?
The police chief, the fire chief, and reauthorization of MR bonds. Those
Okay.
are the two issues.
All right, so there's two.
Right there, the police and
That
fire
came
chief
from
are
us.
one combined amendment, and then reauthorization of MR bonds is a second.
So any other, addition to that, or recommendations are really in jeopardy, put the whole thing in jeopardy, I guess, that any of those would be able to go on there. Because or I guess we'd have to, or we could make a list of priorities. We could amend that election resolution and say these are the priorities of the ones that, if two fit, we'd like these two. If four fit, put these four on here. We could do that too, I guess.
Mr. President, Councilor Lewis, I think the options are that the council can express its priorities, or the council can defer to the judgment of the county clerk and the county commission about, which and the most city issues will fit on the ballot.
And I think we are going to need, we're probably going to need the administration to weigh in on this tonight, because there will be a bill later on in the evening then that they're going to have to be faced with, allowing, maybe 4 or 5 questions beyond the ballot tonight, or, beyond that election resolution, and possibly even jeopardize everything else that's on there. And so I would hope also that any other additions tonight, including this, that they would be a part of the discussion here, because I think that we're putting these questions, I think that we've all agreed on, in jeopardy by ones that we might disagree on here.
Councilor Harris.
Would the county commission, Mr. Zaman, be bound by our preference that we put in the election resolution?
Mr. President, Councilor Harris, no.
Thank you.
And I know that Mr. Zaman has worked closely with the county clerk, along with the commissioners, and I've had a couple meetings also with Commissioner O'Malley and Commissioner Hart-Stebbins. And again, basically, it's their election, it's a general election, and we are at their mercy to see what we can get on that ballot. Hopefully there'll be enough for all the questions to be on the ballot. I don't think that's going to be the case. They said 1 or 2, possibly 3, because basically they've condensed, I think, one of their bond issues into one less question, so that would leave a little bit more room. So I think they're really trying to work with us and, providing us the avenue to get as many of those questions on the ballot as possible. Councilor Gordon,
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Mr. Zaman, for clearing up some of that. And I think that since we're talking about what other people may or may not do, I think we just need to do our job here and vote for the items that we want to vote on, up or down, at whatever level we're going to vote. Send it up to the mayor, and if he wants to jeopardize the whole, the provision for going on the ballot, he has that prerogative. Otherwise, it will go to the county commission, and the commission will look at the items, and they will determine whether they have the weight of going on the ballot for November 4th, or whether they would be not put on the ballot, and I guess essentially sent back to us, saying these did not fit, find some other way of accommodating your vote. The main thing is it will go to the voters, and that's what we're trying to accomplish, I think. So let's move forward with the items and pass them or not pass
Councilor
them.
Pena to close.
Just to add a little bit to what Councilor Garduño and some of the other councilors are saying about whether it's all in the hands of the county, and I think that no one really loses here, because at the end of the day, if we pass all of the proposals that we have in front of us, even though the county commission can decide, and the ones that don't get on the ballot this go around, we have an opportunity for there to be a special election or another election to get them on. So I think it's a win-win for all of us. And then I just want to close by saying, the public asked us to make some bold decisions and to do some bold things, and I think this is an opportunity for the community to make a decision whether they will support this kind of effort to provide services in the community. It's not just the council, and it's not just administration, but it's the community. I urge your support.
We've already closed, Councilor Benton.
If the sponsor would consider it, I have a small correction that I think probably should be made to make sure the intention is clear. But in the floor sub, on the second page on line 11, 50% for services, and I would suggest that be changed to or, because I believe the intention is. So, I mean, are we able to?
That's correct. It was supposed to be like that.
Mr. President, Councilor Ben, the floor substitute includes that change.
It does?
Perhaps you're looking at an older version.
Maybe I am. Okay, thank you, sorry.
Thank you, Councilor Benton. We have a motion and a second to approve O-14 as substituted. All those in favor, raise your hand and say yes. Yes? Opposed?
No.
That carries on a 5-4 vote. We are now under item C, Councilor Pena, P-5.
So this is follow-up to the last bill, and this is adopting a proposition to be submitted to the voters at the next general election concerning the imposition of a 1/8% municipal gross receipts tax for essential services. I move it do pass.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, raise your hand and speak. Excuse me, we have one speaker signed up. That's Tad Naminsky. Or excuse me, Terry Nicole Baca. My apologies. Tad, you're not up on this agenda item. Tad, you're not up on this agenda item. You're fine. Thank you. Terry Nicole Baca, go and proceed.
Yes,
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. President and members of the council. My name is Terry Nicole Baca, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Public Policy at the Greater Albuquerque Chamber of Commerce. The Greater Albuquerque Chamber of Commerce opposes the proposed proposition P-14-5. The Chamber believes a tax increase for the purposes outlined in this proposition would be premature and lacking in accountability at this time. The Chamber acknowledges that there are gaps in the city's homelessness and mental health services system that must be addressed. Although the intent behind the tax increase seeks to address some of these problems, raising revenue before specific recommendations are identified is premature. In addition, the Chamber believes that these bills do not put forth a process that will ensure tax revenue is spent effectively. Raising taxes without accountability hurts employers and hinders economic growth. Finally, while additional funding may be necessary to address gaps and insufficiencies in services, the burden of such funding should be planned and coordinated with county, state, and private sources to ensure adequate and appropriate sources of funds and responsibility for services. The solutions to mental health service problems in the Albuquerque region are complicated, and the Chamber believes that a comprehensive systems review that includes all stakeholders is what is needed to identify a path forward. In support of this belief, the Chamber recently launched its own mental health systems task force. This task force is working to identify a collaborative strategy for improving mental health services throughout our community and our state. We welcome your input and collaboration as we move forward with the work of our task force. The Chamber encourages the entire community, including service providers, funding sources, employers and business, and community organizations to come together to develop specific recommendations on addressing gaps and identifying sources of adequate funding in the city's homelessness and mental health services. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. I think we have a floor substitute also on this bill. Does that need to be handed out, or is it in our packet? Okay. Let's go ahead and move the floor sub. We have a motion and a second by Councilor Peña. All those in favor signify by saying yes. Yes, opposed? We're back on the bill. Councilor Peña to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just urge your support. This is actually the proposition that has the language that will be on the ballot. This amendment inserts a ballot question necessary to place P 14.5 on the November ballot. P 14.5 relates to the imposition of a 1/8% increment of gross receipts tax to pay for social services and capital improvements, and was approved earlier this evening for placement on the November ballot.
We have a motion to approve P5 as substituted. All those in favor signify by saying yes and raise your hand. Yes? Opposed?
No.
That carries on a 5-4 vote. We are now under P4, item J. Councilor Winter? Yes.
Mr. President, we're having a little trouble with the vote. Could we have a
That vote was 5-4. All those in favor signify by saying yes. Yes, opposed? On a 5-4 vote, that carries. Okay, we are now under item J, that's Sanchez and Winter, P4. Councilor Winter. No, we've got P4 on the final.
This is P-14-4, adopting a proposition be submitted to the voters at the next citywide election or direct that amends Charter of the City of Albuquerque concerning direct legislation by voter initiative so that proposed measures shall be submitted to the city's electors only at the general regular municipal election that amends the calculation for the minimal number of petition signatures. I move support.
We have a motion and a second. We have one individual signed up to speak.
Mr. President, is this already on is this one of the items that are on the proposal to send to the county commissioners?
Mr. President, Councilor Winter, no. The bill, the election resolution to send to the county only includes the stuff that the council has already acted upon, but we do have an amendment prepared in case this passes, and we'll be able to add that if so moved by the council, so that it is one of the questions.
Mr. President, so this has not been added, but you're talking about getting an amendment to add another one to that list?
Mr. President, Councilor Winter, to add this one if the council approves and wants to move that amendment.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Yes, Councilor Gordillo.
I'm confused. So if we have only room for 2, where are those 2 going to be garnered from? Because it sounds like if this passes, this takes a position? Is it one of the 2 positions? Or is there a position reserved for this one already?
There potentially could be up to 5 if the rest of these bills pass. Is that correct?
Mr. President and councilors, yes, that's correct. There's an election resolution that's already been introduced that contains the 2 items that the council has already acted upon, and that is the confirmation of the police and fire chief and metropolitan redevelopment bonds. Staff has prepared 3 separate amendments on the assumption, or in case the council approves, the 3 propositions that are on the agenda right now. And as we get to the election resolution, staff will provide those to council for the ones that you've passed. The answer to Councilor Gardino's question is the allocation of space and what gets on the ballot is entirely at the discretion of the county commission. The county clerk will mock up a ballot, and the county commission will decide ultimately what goes on.
Mr. President, then did I misheard the explanation that if we pass this, then it would go on the ballot?
Mr. President, I believe that was just sort of a casual reference to referring the item to the city clerk to work with the county clerk to place it on the ballot.
So there is no place reserved for this like any other of the proposals?
Mr. President, Councilor Gardino, this would be like any of the other city proposals.
And then a procedural question, Mr. President. We went to M, is that right?
Pardon me?
This is M that we're discussing right now?
This is J, this is P-4. Councilor Winter, and then
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I know that we've been working on this one, and it is very important. The issue that I have is, so we put this on, and then we're having the county commission tell this body what we can put on, and they're going to pick and choose whatever they want to put on their ballot, and I have an issue with that. But then the other thing, what's left over is going to go to a special election, whether it's a write-in, and how much is that going to cost?
Mr. President, Councilor Winter, what's left over would not go on the November ballot. It would be at the discretion of the council to place those questions that didn't make it on the ballot either on a special election or hold them over till October of 15 for the municipal election. If the council were to choose to do a special mail-in ballot, the cost would be approximately $500,000.
But if the provision changes in the Constitution, then the remaining questions could go on the APS election ballot in February, is that correct?
Mr. President, that's correct.
That's not till February 2015.
Right, yes.
Council Vice President Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, let's try to get this one straight. So we already have 2 items, before we started tonight, we already have 2 items approved to go on the ballot,
That's
to
correct.
submit to the county to say yes or no. We just passed the 3rd item to be submitted to the county to see if it'll go on the ballot.
Right.
So now we know we've exceeded by 1 what we can possibly put on the ballot. Now we are preparing to vote on 2 others. So as I said initially, when we voted on the last one, what's the rush in voting on one if it looks like we're not going to be able to get it on the ballot anyway? Why don't we do it right and know what we're voting for? Not to say I told you so. But now we have 3 items on the ballot. We've already been told at best we'll get 2, and now we're going to vote on 2 more.
Mr. President, Councilor Jones, not to confuse this any more than I already have apparently, but the reference to 1 or 2 city items on the county ballot was a reference to space, not to items per se. There are some of the city's questions that take up a lot of space. There are some of the city's questions that don't take up a lot of space. To the extent that the clerk has enough space, perhaps 2, 3, maybe even 4 city questions could be on the county ballot rather than just 1, or 1 or 2.
Mr. President.
Go on, proceed.
Okay, that makes it even worse, Mr. Zaman. So we're going to say that we are giving the county the discretion to place items on the ballot based on how much space they take up, not their importance, not their immediate need. So they could potentially take off the bond issue and put on a couple other issues that maybe aren't quite as important, potentially. They have that
Mr.
right.
President, Councilor Jones, I think that's exactly right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilor Winter to close.
I really don't know what to say. This is really important. I know we've been working, and there's been some issues in the past regarding the number of signatures needed to place something on the ballot. It is very important. It's kind of, I mean, I'm going to support it, but then I'm going to have an issue when we start discussing the final action on what we're going to do, but I urge your support.
We have a motion and a second to approve P4. All those in favor signify by saying yes. Yes? Opposed? That carries on an 8-1 vote. We are now under item P6. Councilor Garduno.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is adopting a proposition to be submitted to the voters at the next general election concerning reduction of marijuana penalties within the city of Albuquerque. And I want you to notice that this is very succinct and very short.
We have a motion and a second, and we also have 4 individuals here this evening that are signed up to speak. First speaker is Patrick Davis, followed by Rachel Maestas, followed by Barbara Grothus, followed by Alan Wagman. And once your name has been called, please come to the front and be prepared to speak. Welcome, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. President and councilors. Last month, we turned in more than 16,000 names to the city clerk, 5,000 more than many of you know by now than City Hall had originally required when they set the provision for this. Based on City Hall's directive, we at our campaign designed and executed that campaign to engage your constituents to meet that goal. Quite frankly, our voters did just that. Along the way, we employed more than 24 city residents, a small army of volunteers, many of whom are here tonight to support this, and they attended more than 100 community meetings in just under 8 weeks, knocked on hundreds of doors, and deliberately attended meetings in each of your council districts so that we could proudly come here today to say that this initiative was entirely citywide. The voters have made it clear that this debate should happen at the polling place this November, and we hope that you will agree and honor their wishes. Last week, we obtained the city clerk's data file from the verification process, and although it took them 10 days to match about 9,000 names to the city's voter file, we've been following along with their process, and we've continued that process and matched another 2,000. I want to share just a couple of examples with you tonight as examples. For those of you who can see them, I realize these may be hard to see. As one example of each page is a little unique and sometimes hard to read, but in this one, for instance, you'll see that 3 constituents, 2 of Councilor Garduno's, 1 of Councilor Sanchez's, were each disqualified by the city. The document that the city used to verify them, you can see, is just blank for each of those people. They didn't even try. From the city clerk's office, they entered the first digits of their address, said there's no person there, and disqualified them. We went behind them, typed in the full name, and found 2 of your constituents and 1 of yours, sir. We found another in Council District 3, Councilor Pena, Mr. President and Councilor Pena. The city mistyped this young lady's name. We were able to find her simply by searching her address in the city's voter file, available from a file we obtained from the city clerk. We think there's enough evidence to move forward and support the voters' initiative while we continue this process, and we thank you for that.
Mr. Davis, Councilor Gibson has a question for you.
Yes, sir, Mr. President, Madam Councilor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Davis, approximately how many were you able, if you said that, please say it again for
Sure.
me. How many of those were you able to verify that were not verified or confirmed by the city clerk's office?
During the city clerk's process, they were able to match 9,000 names to the voter file. That took about 10 days. We've begun that process, and they were not able to match 6,000 names. We've begun that process and matched over 2,200 so far. We want to caution and say that our process to sort of requalify or to make that case for those voters is much more complicated than the initial decision to disqualify them. It requires us to contact those voters, obtains copy of each of those individuals' voter registration cards from the county clerk, and work with those voters to get them to the city clerk. It's a very time-consuming process, but one that we've been committed to doing, and we're in the process of doing. To date, we have not yet found any that we've qualified that have not been certified by, or not been verified at the county clerks by their voter registration.
Okay. Can you, if I may, just
Go
one
and proceed,
follow-up?
Councilor Gibson.
Can you give me some reasons why, you did mention in your explanation, one reason why they may not have been found in the records. Can you give me some other reasons that possibly the city clerk's office may have, were unable to find voters?
Sure, and I must say, we ultimately got their data file, which gives the reason codes that their staff did, so we didn't have to speculate, because that became complicated for our staff to try to double behind them. One example, for instance, in your district, Mr. President, Madam Councilor, the city staff mistyped an address number. So this person lives at 9904 Leyendecker Road. They mistyped and left out one of those digits, and so they apparently did not find a 100% match. We were able to find that person by their name. The most common error, the most common reason we found so far are simply errors like that, typographical errors or errors where they just simply appeared not to have tried, quite frankly, and there are many staffers who did, but there is a regular pattern of those who did not. There are other cases where we can easily find voters by the mailing address, and we've had this discussion, the council's had this discussion earlier about mailing ballots to voters. When our conversations with the city clerk's office, they've informed us that they did not consider the address where the city clerk mails a ballot to a voter. It is only the address where a voter has registered at some point in the past. And as all of you know, having done elections, and as we know now in the city for doing mail-in elections, there's been a focused effort by this city and this council to update mailing addresses for voters so that they can participate in the process. And we think it's frustrating to us that we could so easily find so many of these voters by the address that we actually send them the ballot to participate with the city, but that they were not allowed to participate in this process.
And Mr. Davis, I think the biggest error that was made, you were talking about the other errors, was the city clerk and the city attorney initially giving you the wrong information, and at the 11th hour, when the signatures were due, gave you a different number. And I'm extremely concerned about that. I think, there was due diligence on your end in getting the signatures that were required. Had that number been greater initially, you would have probably brought in more signatures. But I think it was a huge mistake on the part of the city clerk and the city attorney to give you the wrong information initially when you went out and started garnering your petitions.
Mr. President, if I can respond briefly,
Yes,
we
you
just
may.
want to say, we agree, obviously, and this was a process that requires some work from the city. To present that to us, it's based on a formula, as we all talked, council staff mentioned at the last meeting, and mentioned that the formula was, I think in his words, confusing at best. But it requires the city clerk to make calculations based on data and canvassing results that are not available to the general public. In fact, we had to go and ask how they were maintained and found them in a locked file cabinet in the back of the clerk's office. And we have an interim city clerk who has done her best to do it with the advice and I think in the direction that she's been able to obtain. But it's been frustrating for us. We designed a campaign to deliver on the number that the city hall told us to do. We've done campaigns for years in many of your districts, and we've always been able to deliver that type of result when we know what the results are, and that's what's frustrating to us, and we appreciate that from this council, that this might be a way to honor those voters' wishes today.
Councilor Gordon.
Mr. President, thank you very much. Mr. Davis, thank you. Thank you for the work you did. We all know, we've run, all of us here, and we base our campaigns, if you will, on finite numbers, numbers that we believe and we think are vettable, that we feel we can reach. I knocked on 3,000 doors, but knowing that, I think I knocked on your door twice.
More than that, I think.
But knowing that I had to reach 1,280 people.
Yes, sir.
And that was my winning number. But if somebody would have told me in good faith, really all you have to do is reach 600, then I may have sort of thought to myself, once I get 620 folks, I'm going to stop because I've got the numbers I need. Only to find out after the election or the hour after deadline that no, you actually needed 1,800. But it was too late. And I think that is, seminal to this argument, seminal to this idea that we would disenfranchise people from the ability to essentially vote on something that they were very deliberate about. I mean, they signed a petition thinking that they were being honored and they were going to be respected and they were going to be able to vote. And now we're telling them, even worse now, we're telling them not only that we do the wrong thing, intentionally or not, but we also are going to disrespect you by saying you're going to get in a queue of whether or not you're important, whether, a resolution is going to be passed or not passed, whether the mayor may or may not veto it. I mean, all of these machinations that have nothing to do with honoring these folks. 16,000 people is not a number that you come up with in a weekend. That's a lot of work. So, Mr. President, I think for us to now be playing numbers is not only a little late, but it's a little disingenuous and acting as if the mistake was made unintentionally. Thank you.
Councilor Lewis and then Councilor Winter.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Davis, thank you.
Thanks.
I think certainly we don't want to mix or confuse honest questions with any disrespect for you.
No.
Or conjuring up other things that maybe Councilor Gardenia maybe was referring to. So I do have some questions for
Yes,
you.
sir.
And I may also say that, well, let me first ask you this. Why a city ordinance? I mean, why did you all choose, of all the cities in New Mexico, knowing that there are state law implications on this issue, why not put your efforts toward the state legislature?
Mr. President, Councilor Lewis, thank you for that. And as you know, we've been speaking with your constituents about this and asking them to engage with you as well about this process. As you well know, and as we may all well know, there is momentum building at the state legislature and has for the past few years with bipartisan support. A full decriminalization bill passed the House, and the Senate has on a number of occasions introduced various levels of legalization and decriminalization on this issue. But we, you know, our organization at Progress Now and others that we worked with and some of the volunteers that worked with us have been working in city issues for a really long time because we're concerned about the quite frankly, voter apathy in local issues and local elections. And where we see an opportunity that our members came to us and asked for the chance to engage on an issue, to talk to City Hall, to get involved in city elections, they ask us for an opportunity to look at this. It's very much what some people have looked at other cities across the country who have taken some bold action to change their local laws. We are not under any guise that this changes state law, and it presents a dilemma for our police officers. As you and I both know, I was a police officer for many years and dealt with discretion issues like this. But it's one that our voters wanted here. It's one our members wanted. And one, quite frankly, that we have almost 1,000 constituents in your district who have signed and asked.
And Mr. President, yeah, it does create a dilemma, certainly for law enforcement like that too. I mean, because you're familiar with the law of preemption, constitutional law of preemption. And I guess my next question would be, and this is on subject, I think it's important. There was the last initiative was for late-term abortion ban.
Yes.
And those citizens, thousands of people in my district, as well as others in all the district also, that exercise their right to do that. The question was raised during that time, even after they overwhelmingly, did what was required of them, to get that question on the ballot. But still, even on this council and others raised the question. Actually, people raised the question of the legitimacy of that, which it blew me away. That people would actually raise the question of the legitimacy of people exercising their right to sign a petition and to get something on the ballot. That they had the legal right to do, and certainly followed all of our laws, and yet still people, question their ability to. But the other question was simply that right there, that law of preemption. That they said, why would we pass something or do something on a city ordinance level that would be putting ourselves in jeopardy, on a state level so that question was raised. And it seems like this issue probably even more directly and clearly, violates state laws, or at least, there's some difficulties there, I think, as you mentioned also. So my question is this: Did you support the last ballot initiative and their right to be able to have that on a ballot?
To your, Mr. President, Council Lewis, to your question about preemption, as you well know, our city police officers and others currently have conflicting city and state ordinances to choose from when they charge here in the city of Albuquerque every day. And they make those decisions, and it's within their discretion. When it comes to the previous ordinance on the abortion ordinance, we, like you, and I'm reminded, in fact, that you asked for that you were the sponsor of the red light camera resolution to ask for the will of the voters on an issue that this council simply and the voters were interested in waiving, and that those very issues were asked then, whether it was appropriate for the council just to put a proposition before voters. But I will say, in the last election, we did support the process for it. We opposed the issue and worked on that campaign for the Respect Albuquerque Women side of it. But we supported the idea in our organization for citizens to petition their government. If they go through that process, and I believe the conversation with Mr.
So
Perry.
you supported that question being on the ballot? You supported it?
We supported the election, the process for the petition for citizens to petition their government, and because.
What did you oppose on it?
I'm sorry?
What did you oppose specifically then?
We opposed the actual question. We encouraged voters to vote no on that proposition.
And why did you oppose the actual question? No, I mean, because I think it was related to the fact that it was illegal in the state, that there was a state law against it. Is that what?
That was not. I don't recall the specific language on that campaign, but as you'll recall, there were a number of issues, and there were a number of organizations
Yeah, I know
that
there were
worked
a lot of
for it.
reasons why I'm sure
And the
you've
primary one
supported it.
was that we respected the rights of women to make their own decisions and to keep government, quite frankly, out of decisions by individuals. And I think that type of Western libertarian type freedom is also incumbent in this very question about marijuana, and whether, if we're not harming each other, whether the government should be taking some type of extreme action to put people in jail for something simple.
I'm just asking about consistency, and so I appreciate you,
Thank you,
in
sir.
that way. So that's what I'm getting at. One more question,
Go ahead, proceed.
Mr. President. If it sounds like we're going to have to make a choice, or at least the county commission might have to make a choice over which questions would be on the ballot. So would you put this question higher on the ballot than say the raising the, 8%, 1/8 tax that we just passed? Or, I mean, what priority would you put this? The police and fire chief, the question that'll be on the ballot, the one that we just, actually the two that we just passed. I mean, what priority would you put on there? And I think this is an important question because that's what we're going to be faced with this.
When he's elected counselor, he can answer.
Yeah, I don't think that is his decision. Councilor Lewis, that will be the decision and the priority of this council. Councilor Winter.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do appreciate the work that you do. I grew up in fact, I was a teenager in the 60s and the 70s when you'd smoke marijuana and you'd be addicted, and that was the whole big thing and all that. And then I read somewhere in the newspaper a couple days ago, and the NFL's looking at the issues they're having with pain pills, and so they're looking at marijuana as a pain reliever in the NFL. It's such an interesting change from those old days. The question that I have is, I know you talked about your signatures you got, but you all didn't even reach the low level that was first given to you that was incorrect. You all didn't even reach that. And we're kind of aware of gathering signatures because we have to do that when we go for election. And if those signatures aren't perfect, the way they're written, on the registration, they throw them out. And we deal with that every day. And so are you saying that the city clerk intentionally did not count the right signatures? What happened? Because you all didn't even reach the low number.
Mr. President, Councilor Winter, I appreciate the opportunity first to meet with you in your office a few weeks ago to walk through this a little bit and to have that discussion, and I appreciate it. And it's been a very civil process with you and your constituents. The bottom line is we disagree with the clerk's assertion that we only made 9,000, as I made a brief part of that case today. Our review through that process has led us to the conclusion that, one, there was no written, we are clear that there was no written process given by the clerk to other staff on how to validate signatures, and that where inconsistencies were found, they weren't corrected in a universal manner. And I think that's what our real concern is in some of the issues, some of the names that I brought forward today and others that we continue to look for. We believe from the very beginning, and now more strongly than I did when we turned these in, that we have met the threshold that the City Hall gave us by the city clerk and by her own explanation last week that she was focused on one part and not the other, and that she felt confident that the city attorney had approved her message because it was right. We felt we met our goal. As I said, they gave us a goal, we designed a plan and executed it, and we felt we made it. I'm even more confident now as we build the actual names of those actual voters and where they live and whose districts they are. And so we believe that voters have done their part. And if City Hall had asked them to do more, they would, but they did what they were asked. And with respect, we don't have any personal disagreement with the city clerk. She's trying very hard. But in this case, there was a big mistake. Voters did their part, and we appreciate the opportunity this council gives to honor the will of those voters by letting them continue that process. We realize it's more incumbent on this council to take those bigger actions. But the most basic part of our process, of all the questions that the council is considering, the very first one that ought to give us pause, I believe, are ones that were created by the very people that created this city.
Council Vice President Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Davis?
Yes, ma'am.
I guess all I can say is, when all of us went out to gather petition signatures, which we've all done, we were required, and we knew we were required to match exactly the signatory, the name, the spelling of the name. If there was an initial, the initial had to be in there, the address. Everything had to match perfectly with the voter ID, with the registration, voter registration. So why, Mr. Davis, are you not to be held by that same standard?
Mr. President, Madam Councilor, I will say I see some other councilors shaking their heads, and I'll tell you, is the letter and the information that we received from the city clerk and the city attorney, they must approve this process. They're required under the city charter to give us the qualifications and the standards for this. Those documents have been widely publicized and reported in the news, Mr. McKay's here and others. None of those qualifications were ever put forward, and in fact, during our numerous processes and communications with the city clerk throughout this process, the standard has changed a number of times. And with respect, ma'am, I understand that some people may be under the impression that that is sort of the best standard, but there's language in our charter and in our ordinance that says that the city clerk should give the widest possible latitude in quotes, to qualifying voters in petitions. And quite frankly, our practice in the past in the abortion ordinance and in the minimum wage ordinance and others that we've worked in has not been to that standard. It's been to the standard that we use to qualify this, and we hope that the city will continue that.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. And I must add that obviously we have different opinions of this
Yes, ma'am.
because I just got an email from you today that gave me a list of the people in my district who were in favor of this, and 2 of them had put their addresses as outside the city of Albuquerque. So that pretty much says to me that they are not voters in my district. So, I'm wondering which standard is truly the one, and I believe that, in my opinion, that one must be a registered, a valid registered voter in the city of Albuquerque to qualify. Obviously, courts and the city clerk might have a different idea, but thank you, sir.
Councilor Winter.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think the city clerk is here, our acting city clerk, and I would really like to ask you a couple questions, and I don't want to put you on the spot.
Mr. Davis, I think you're excused. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez.
Thank you. I just kind of want to clarify, get some clarification. Can you just go over the review of the names that you did and kind of what you found and how you would throw them out? And because I know a lot of folks that you have that work in the city clerk's office are very good and have been doing it for quite a while, and because we have worked with them too.
President Sanchez, Councilor Winter, the process, I've been with the city clerk's office for 19 years, and I've been checking petitions forever. All of yours, the mayor's, and the process that I've always known is that has to be a registered city voter. So if they live in Rio Rancho, we have to kick them out. If they live in Santa Fe, of course, and there's a lot of them that were out of town. We check every signature on the petitions. All of them are not clear. Some are, we can't read them. We try very hard. We even ask other employees, can we read this? We try to do every effort that we can to try to find that person in the voter registration. If it has a PO, we do not count those. It states that it has to be a registered voter. But we do give exceptions as well. So if they have Matt Lucero, and it's registered under Matthew Lucero on their same address, then we will accept that. If there's a Matthew Lucero or a Matt Lucero, and they actually are registered under Matthew Lucero at a different address, but there's multiple, we can't pick and choose which one that one can be. So we have to reject that one. And that's the process.
Thank you. So you've been doing it a long time.
Yes.
How many years have you been in city clerk's office?
19 and a half years.
19 years. Did you do this one any different than you did like when we have our signatures going or any of the other ballots?
No, sir. No.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Pena, and then Councilor Harris.
Just for clarity, this would be for Mr. Zaman, and so I think the questions are being asked about whether they were able to get this question on the ballot, and obviously they didn't have the numbers. But really what we're addressing here is Councilor Garduño's desire to just put this initiative on the ballot, so it doesn't relate to any of the discussion that we're having right now. Am I correct?
Mr. President, Councilor Pena, that's correct. This would be an advisory question. It's not dependent on the results of the signatures of the petition drive.
Because I think they were already deemed that they didn't qualify, so that's mute, right? Okay, thank you.
Councilor Winter.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Councilor Pena, you're absolutely right. But when I met, I was struggling with the fact that the numbers were given that were lower. And so my whole threshold was, well, if they meet that lower number threshold, then I'm going to have to really think about this issue and how I feel about it, because absolutely, if it was the wrong number and they got that number. So that's why I'm asking that. I mean, it's kind of a dilemma for me.
Councilor Harris, and then Councilor Garduño, and then Councilor Lewis.
And thanks, and I'm not sure if this is a question or not for the acting city clerk, but just sort of a statement. When I got my signatures to get the qualifying contributions, which is something that's very important, I mean, I had a walk list and I went door to door, and when I actually hit the doors that were registered voters, my hit rate and Trina's hit rate was about 95%. When I had volunteers who were getting signatures elsewhere, the rate went way down. And I find that the city clerk was very, very accurate. I just can't believe the discrepancy that the other gentleman was talking about. I just don't think it exists, at least not in my experience, and I've done this several times also, that if you use a poor process, you get poor results. If you use a good process, you get good results. Another statement, perhaps I'll have Mr. Perry talk about this, is that there's a state statute. I passed it out. Everyone has it in front of them. It is New Mexico Statute 30-31-26. A single piece of paper, and subsection B of that statute says a municipality may, by ordinance, prohibit distribution or possession of a controlled substance enumerated in subsection, rather Schedules I, Roman numeral 2, Roman numeral 3, Roman numeral 4, but penalty provisions shall be the same as those provided for a similar crime and Controlled Substances Act. So, I mean, the state statute says quite clearly that any penalty that we pass under municipal ordinance can't vary from the state law, and if it does, you know, it's an invalid penalty. So I wonder why we are asking the people to weigh in on something if the result would be something that's totally illegal. And the question that's going to go on the ballot doesn't really leave any room for doing anything other than doing something which the state statute says we can't do. The question is, shall the Albuquerque City Council adopt legislation that amends city law to reduce penalty for possession of less than 1 ounce of marijuana, where the state statute says we just can't do that? So unlike the red light ordinance, where it's an ordinance that we passed, there's no question that we could repeal it. Here, we're asked to ask the municipal voters if they should weigh in on whether or not we should pass an illegal ordinance. And I just think that's an improper question for us to be putting on the ballot. Now, I would have voted if the people who did this petition drive would have actually met the required number under the charter. I would have voted to put it on the ballot. I had grave concerns about the abortion question. I thought that was probably going to get struck down by the courts, but the people went through the process and they did what was required under the charter. The folks here just didn't do it, and for us to then set something forth that is going to be clearly illegal, if we were to enact an ordinance based on that resolution question, it's just something that we shouldn't be doing.
Councilor Gordillo, and then
Thank you,
Councilor
Mr.
Lewis.
President. And to the last question or last concern, there are areas that Albuquerque, because it's a home rule city, has differed from state law. And I'd like to ask Mr. Melendres, is there a difference in what exists right now for marijuana prosecution or whatever from state law?
Mr. President, Councilor Garduni, are you asking about the marijuana ordinance that the city currently has on the books?
Correct.
We do have a current criminal penalty for possession of marijuana that does have some slight deviations from state law. Basically, the city's ordinance basically penalizes possession of less than an ounce of marijuana with a penalty of up to $50 for the first offense, whereas the state law penalty is up to $100. Similarly, for second offense, the city law penalizes with a penalty of up to $500 in, I think, 90 days in jail. And the state law has a penalty of up to $1,000 in a year in jail. So there is some discrepancy as it exists. I do have a copy of the statute that was passed out, and I think that this would be given weight as well, so that the preemption issue could be there.
But to the point, right now we have practice, if you will, that deviates from state. So to the last person's concern, we either have been complicit, and certainly someone who might have known that some of our procedures and practices that we have now in policies are in conflict with the state, and maybe it would be the job of that person to go through every single law we have, even though we're a home rule state, and make sure that they're complying with state statutes. I mean, I'm asking a rhetorical question because I don't think it'll happen. It'll only happen, of course, if it affects the need, the concern, or the priority of that one individual.
Mr. President, Councilor Garduño, it's an interesting issue, and as has been pointed out, we run into the preemption issue all the time. We can't, we're limited in some ways what we can do with respect to state laws. Sort of just thinking about it in the way that you presented it, if you're a person who is cited or arrested for possession and you're cited under the lesser penalty of the city ordinance, you're probably not likely to be complaining that the city's preempted.
So you wouldn't say, I don't want to be arrested under this lesser charge because the state says I should be charged $500 and a year in jail?
Mr. President, Councilor Garduño, that sort of analysis may be the reason why we haven't seen a challenge to the issue.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Councilor Lewis. And then we'll go on. We still have 3 other individuals that have signed up to speak, so we'll...
Yeah, just quickly, I think wanted to draw a distinction here and make it very clear that whether it be the red light camera initiatives, that certainly was a choice that we made. This is a choice that we're making. I mean, I think the issue of the that is unfortunate. By the way, Mr. Davis, and I want to make it very clear, and I said this at the last meeting, that was a mistake, and hope we get to the bottom of that, and I hope that never happens again, because that shouldn't have happened. And so I'm together with everybody else on that. But this is a separate bill tonight. This is I think same issue but separate question that we're faced with, and that is we get to make this decision tonight, at least to go to the next level. That's what we're being faced with. Whereas if this came to us in a ballot initiative and the people met the threshold, then we would not have a choice on it. And I would absolutely support that because I support the process and support the law and support our people's ability to be able to do that. But because this is a decision that we make tonight, and that's the way it's brought before us, then we also I'll make a decision that I feel like is the right one also. Mr. Davis, my colleague, seemed to think that that the questions were disrespectful to you, and if they were, please, that's not the way they were intended. And I hope we can continue to have honest questions and conversations, and I'm always open to that. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Councilor Lewis. Next speaker is Rachel Maestas, followed by Barbara Grothus and Ellen Wagman will be the